Okay, class, let's begin with the PowerPoint. Remember, you're to be completing 5 questions that will be mentioned during this particular slideshow. So what we're looking at now is the physical and mental development of middle childhood students. Growth tends to slow at this point in time, but we are still going through some physical transformations. Remember how we did the head to tail cephalodical growth portion or pattern and growth. So our lower body is going to be growing the fastest, and we're developing longer limbs, stronger limbs, and developing from the trunk outward as well. One of the biggest you hear a lot of in news and political debate and in the schools has to do with obesity for children, and that there seems to be a lot of difficulty with children who are more sedentary. This might relate also to some eating habits, and of course there's been a lot of emphasis in schools and otherwise to get kids to eat more healthy foods, but there is still some debate about this. The first question for you to answer is, what is BMI? What is BMI? Well, that is the body mass index. The body mass index is taken in schools yearly, and a report is sent home to parents that their child might be at risk for obesity or low weight, other kinds of concerns having to do with the size of the body and the weight that the child is carrying. One thing that this does not factor into is that really what we're terming as obesity is different. The standards have changed from, say, 25 or 30 years ago. The kids were weighing much the same. There is an increase of extreme weight, but the tendency is for children to be more chubby than otherwise. And the bad news about BMI is that even those kids that sort of are more normal are already considered obese, and it really can devastate a child because they're worrying about losing weight in elementary school. Those kinds of things would be best remedied with activity rather than just sort of just altering the food intake of children. And this is something that sort of really isn't understood. We just assume that this is by comparison throughout the history of man, that all of a sudden we have these obese children. Just the growth of the numbers of obese children just way beyond the pale. And the fact of the matter is, it's not that way. We need to encourage, though, children to become much more physically active than they are. And if there is a problem with obesity, it rests in, again, those families that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds where they might not be aware of how to cook and prepare foods that would be more well balanced. We tend to let kids just be involved in watching video game or watching TV or playing video games. We need to make kids more active. That's really the answer to the BMI. And you can see that there's some tendencies. The more sedentary that an individual is, the higher their body mass index might be. We do know that there are some psychological problems that are created. I mentioned before about how even elementary age children are agonizing over their weight, but it's because these kids are often targeted by those kids that are smaller, and I'm talking about the extremely obese kids. There's teasing that goes on, maybe an inordinate amount towards them. There are problems that they can develop around depression anxiety, school anxiety, not wanting to attend, or creating behavior problems there. So there are consequences, but the goal should be, how can we get these kids to be much more active than they actually are right now? And as we enter into the summer months, we should be seeing kids outside playing more and more, rather than just hiding inside playing video games and sitting around. One of the things that happens as we move into elementary school is that kids begin to get more exposure to viruses that are in the community. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, because we're building up antibodies as we manage these outbreaks of flu and other kinds of things that are going to protect us down the way. However, some of the more chronic conditions begin to show up: asthma, and then other kinds of illnesses that maybe relate to some genetic issues like cystic fibrosis, or maybe some childhood cancers that could be developing, that we begin to see this in early elementary school. Now, asthma, and this is the second question, asthma primarily right now, at this point in time, asthma is seen as caused by the environment. And so the second question is, where does asthma come from? It's not necessarily related to weight. It's not necessarily related to just heredity, but certain environmental risk factors. We're talking about sometimes kids that are sitting around in cities, let's say, where there's problems with certain particulates that the kids are breathing in. There seems to be an interplay between heredity and environment, but it's the triggering event is the environment and what's understood about asthma. One thing, though, that is a preventative is that early on kids are engaged in good cardiovascular activity. That seems to help with the body sort of overcoming the, maybe again the toxins that are in the air, so that earlier on we would have kids that would be active. So that's why sometimes we say, oh, it's just related to a child's weight, or something like that. That's usually a reflection more of the sedentary lifestyle again. So early on we need to get kids to be active, and if they do develop asthma, we understand that it's an environmental issue, and we do need to be aware of those things when they occur. When we look at what happens to children and really into early adulthood, the most common factor in a child's death or injury are automobile accidents. As kids move into their teenage years, of course, they're doing the driving, and as young children, though, we usually are having the same kinds of issues, where if there is an accident, if a child is injured, it usually is there. These are kids not necessarily developing, diseases or other kinds of things. It really is about vehicular accidents. So much needs to be done in terms of prevention. We even think about kids riding bikes and wearing helmets, or if they're riding quads, they need to ride helmets. Those are things that relate to lowering the risk of unintended injuries that might occur. As we move along, we're also developing more physical strength. Our gross motor skills are improving, so we're able to be more flexible, demonstrate balance and agility, coordination, and also improvement in our fine motor skills. Again, working from the trunk out, that we're able to see that kind of development improving. Sometimes we see some differences that occur in motor development between boys and girls as they enter adolescence, but really up through the 6th grade or so, the tendency is to be quite equal, and the girls can have the same potential in terms of soccer skills or baseball skills, things like that. However, as boys develop and mature in their adolescence, they do get stronger and are able to be faster, all of those kinds of things that separate them. Typically, what we're beginning to see is as the older the girls get, the better they do it with fine motor skills. So the drawing, the things that would be more related to fingertips and just the gentle nuances that we would be aware of then. Boys, as we get older, tend to, again, develop more with speed and the larger muscle group development. So that tends to lend us to have greater ability in sports. It's not always the case, but that's the general tendency. One thing that does happen is along the way, the gender roles that we want our children to have become impacting on the environment. And so girls are not encouraged to play baseball. They might play softball or soccer, but we're not going to be playing football typically. We're going to be doing other kinds of things. So the law a number of years ago required that there be equality at the collegiate level anyway when it comes to male and female sports. But we also have, again, the pressure of parents, the media. This is what a boy should do, this is what a girl should be doing. But physically, we know we're moving into a differentiation. But during elementary school, you can have girls performing as well, if not better, than the boys that are. Physical play development is important. We need to get kids to learn how to manage their emotions. Playing sports is great for that. It's great for physical development. Like I said, emotions, learning how to lose, learning how to win, and it also helps with some creativity. Problem is, many of our games right now are heavily, or at least athletics, are heavily guided by parents or adults, and that's not always the best way, because it sets up situations where kids are really forced to kind of live out the dreams of their parents. But we know that a number of kids, really do begin to shine, and it helps for them to be involved in some kind of organized sports. Although I harken back to the era when I grew up, many of the things that we did, particularly during the days of summer, were games that we played, that we invented. Tag, certain kinds of kickball or stickball games, just to be out there, to be active. That seems to help with maturing, I think, in a lot of ways, particularly around emotional and behavioral regulation. And that's lost some with adult organized and heavily controlled sports. We also know that physical education is being de-emphasized, and that's really a problem, because it's just not good for our kids to be less active than they already are. So when Piaget, we'll go back to how, again, in this idea of cognitive development, it has to do with brain development as well. And we become more efficient as we use our brain matter and the synaptic pruning that we'll be talking about, and also just making more rational thinking or logical thinking occur because of the speed at which we're able to take information in and process it. We have some things that happen with, say for instance, with spatial reasoning, that children are beginning to be able at this point in time to orient themselves north, south, east, and west. Many times their homework assignments will be, draw a map how to get from your home to the school. This involves not only just sort of an internal guidance system, but being able to be aware of landmarks, where they fit in the ride to and from school, just even the direction that they're traveling from, looking at the sun. Those things become important in being able to sort of spatially do orientation. We also learn some things with math around seriation, which has to do with ordering items like smallest to largest. So if you had 3, 6, 2, put those in the proper order, smallest to largest, then we'd know we need to move the 2 to the beginning. 2, 3, and 6. We're learning how to order. And conservation also has an idea of understanding about the properties. not only of numbers, but also of the differences that we might find in people given their differences in color, maybe, or in age or whatever, but we get a sense that there are aspects of human experience that are the same. And it's important for them to understand that in classification. Conservation relates also with math. 2 plus 3 equals 5 is the same as, or related to 5 minus 3 equals 2, just being able to reverse. Again, a lot of the math skills that you might have developed during this time, that's what the teachers are emphasizing. So again, when it comes to recognizing and being able to orient yourself, you begin to pick out landmarks and then organize travel, and then maybe be able later to just read a map. Okay, let's move up here to attention. We have this increase in information processing speed that occurs, and it has to do with synaptic pruning. And synaptic pruning is basically, and this is the third question, synaptic or unstimulated neural pathways. So we're again putting all our energy into things that are going to make our thinking more efficient. Getting rid of unstimulated or unused neural pathways. Okay, so that'll be our third question. Some strategies that help with memory. And again, we're able to take information in. We begin to rehearse it. So we learn by rote, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. You learn it sort of by practicing the order in which something presents itself, or maybe just the functions of certain aspects of what math or what arithmetic might be, or subtraction. Organization is sort of now beginning to define, think in language, maybe it has to do with plurals and singular. We begin to organize things so that we can relate. And finally, then there's this elaboration where we sort of blend this idea of what we know about something and how it might be related to something that's not necessarily on the surface to be understood. So when we would say, for instance, talk about a group of people, that we would sort of say, oh, all girls are this way, that we also, through elaboration, are able to see that girls can also do these other things. They can be firemen, they can be doctors, they can be a number of things. So again, we begin to see all of this information kind of being organized essentially more efficiently. And later on, when we talk about how our minds work, which is through sensory information, short-term memory and long-term memory, a lot of these same things are happening. So it's much easier for us, say for instance, if we have a particular interest, we've organized, say, sports teams. And if something happens to a team that we really like, we're going to sort of go through an elaboration of that and create a relationship, say, with the Steelers and their new draft choices, and them coming into camp and what's happening, and that we'll remember then years later, oh yeah, they were the first pick or they were the second pick. And trust me, for some people that are sports aficionados, they can retrieve that information very easily. But that's how it works. It's what we define as important. We begin to build meaning and emotion around those memories. Attention deficit disorder. We have a number of children that are treated for attention deficit disorder. It's also related to adults as well. And we treat it with a number of different things. So first off, let me define it. It's not just kids that bounce up and down and move all around and are typically what we would call hyperactive. But the idea is they have little impulse control. So kids that sit quietly but daydream can also be considered to have attention deficit disorder. And so there are some real problems that can occur. Some social because of the behavioral issues of impulse control and the lack thereof, or academic problems, not being able to focus and learn the material properly. So how do we treat this? Well, we need to really consider two things, and that is the use of stimulants such as Ritalin or Adderall. These are amphetamines. And we also combine that most effectively with certain kinds of behavioral interventions. Helping kids journal what their homework is going to be, writing down the requirements each day, what they're supposed to do in terms of chores. And we do this, and it's most effective if attention deficit with or without hyperactivity is present with medicine. Now, fourth question, why do we give stimulants or amphetamines to children to treat hyperactivity? It seems to be counterindicated. Well, what actually happens is when the brain receives a stimulant, it's able to process information more quickly, so it actually stops the impulse. We begin to think before we act. And that's basically the reason why you give stimulants to kids who have hyperactive disorder. Normally, they're not able to control themselves. Allow their brain to work more quickly, more efficiently. It speeds up that processing, and they can, again, stop the impulses. So the answer would be is to really speed up the brain. All right. As we grow older, we're certainly going to be developing more kinds of interests in what we need, what we want to do. So we become very more directed or motivated to learn certain things. This goes along with the synaptic pruning and the development in the brain of more logical kinds of abilities. And so kids might show interest in animals, somebody else might show an interest in music, whatever. It's blended, it's their own interest, and it's driven by their own intensity, but it has to do with what they're exposed to. What opportunities do they have? Again, if we have kids sitting around playing video games, they're not really getting exposed to too much. So we as parents need to encourage or have our own children be active in some way with things that they might not normally do. Oh, we hate this, I don't want to do this. Well, the fact of the matter is they might find that they like it, and it can be across a broad range of experience. So we want to promote this idea of them being able to think and sort of guide their own thinking, which later on, kids, I think we talked about it in the last lecture, kids being able to sort of sit quietly by themselves. We want that, but we also want them to be interested in social learning as well. But that comes with this idea of cognitive self-regulation. When is it that we're going to be able to, sort of on our own, begin to see what it is we want to do and maybe expand our interests into a real skill, maybe even a skill that we can use vocationally, earn a living at. So we need to sort of help children with certain tasks. This is how you do this. Help them plan maybe ahead of time. These are the tools that you're going to need, and help them with strategies. What is it if you run into a problem? What else could you use? Well, maybe I could use duct tape instead of glue, something that a lot of those of us who are weekend repair freaks, we know there's a lot that there's a lot of damage we can do with repairs around the house, but duct tape can work a lot of different miracles, at least in the short term. And we sort of monitor how kids are doing. The best way to really kind of look at this is it's seen actually when kids take music lessons and they have to learn how to practice. Maybe they're going to learn to play the trumpet, They have to really show an effort in preparing for lessons by practicing, taking what they've learned from lessons and practicing different kinds of things. Sort of imagine the ways that they could remember musical notes or how to play, and then obviously it's going to be monitored. One of the more important things that happens with children is this idea of cognitive self-regulation, because we're teaching them to use their brains in a way that they might normally not really access. So what do? We need to help them with reading and math. These are basic skills that they're going to need. We mentioned, I think before, some of the whole language issue problems. That alone doesn't help kids learn how to spell. But phonics and awareness of phonological, what is an S sound, those are things that help with reading and understanding and comprehension. Mathematics, again, the practices that we have to do, and we do that initially with rehearsal, but then often later on it's something that more naturally happens with children as math problems present themselves. We also have here a way to look at how to be successfully intelligent. What is it that we need to do? And so Sternberg has an idea that what we need to do is really combine three things. One is a creative intelligence, to encourage kids to find new things that they might be interested in. Read a book about being an aviator or working in a mine or something like that. And that will, again, encourage sort of greater knowledge overall, but it'll help them to be creative. As we move into practical intelligence, then as they sort of maybe follow that track, maybe how to become a nurse or a fireman or something, they've been creatively inspired to do something, they're going to learn some of the practical things. This is what I have to do to be a doctor, or this is what a doctor actually does. As we move into the analytical, then it's like, what is it that I have to do to become a doctor? Oh, I have to get good grades, maybe study biology, chemistry, some other kinds of things that are important. All of these together make for what Sternberg called successful intelligence. Gardner's multiple intelligence sort of changed the way we look at defining IQ. Typically when someone takes an IQ test, they're looking at the language, the math, and that's about it. But Gardner came along and said, no, there are other aspects of intelligence that people display that might not fit into that typical IQ. Because we do have some people that are wonderful linguists. They can just use the language, they combine that with interpersonal skills, and we have some of the best orators, that we have that ever, came down and inspired other humans. Maybe someone who has musical talent, but they're not necessarily great interpersonally. They're kind of isolated, but they have a specific intelligent music that they're able to extend beyond the norm. So, think about certain musicians or artists that understood spatial kinds of relationships, who could paint, but they were sort of odd people, eccentric people, in terms of their personal relationships. Well, Gardner says we sort of contain in a profile, a human profile, a number of these aspects that might relate to each other or stand alone, but that these are just as important as math and language alone. So we have athletes who do well with bodily kinesthetic activities, to know how to perform certain things, to shoot a jump shot, to kick a field goal, to throw a pitch. All of those things require, at least at elite levels, a higher level of understanding or intelligence in that area, more so than what the average person might be. A naturalist, people that are just kind of able to make their way in the world. They can orient themselves quickly and kind of travel, and they do well at that. Interpersonal, they're able to get along with other people. Or intrapersonal, they kind of are comfortable in their own skin. They might not be the brightest bulb in the pack, but they feel comfortable. They know what they're able to do, and they're successful at what they do to the degree that they know this is what I am capable of. So it sort of changed the way we need to encourage children to find what they're good at, to encourage exploration with that, and really improve the quality of their life. So our fifth and final question is, what is intrapersonal intelligence? And again, that's comfort in your own skin. That's sort of being at peace with yourself. Intrapersonal skills or intelligence. We think about IQs as, again, things that may present certain differences and outcomes for success. And this goes back to Alfred Binet, who was a Frenchman in the 1800s, for a good reason, wanted to be able to help with understanding those people that we would now call developmentally challenged, formerly mentally retarded. What do we do with these people? So his interest was certainly to benefit mankind. So you don't just want to dismiss all this, but when we think about intelligence, we're often thinking of IQ. Average IQ for the someone in the United States, let's say, is 100. In any given environment, the average IQ is 100. So there's some differences in background with people that affect scoring. Maybe they're in a deprived environment where they haven't been exposed to certain concepts or whatever. It's not that they're stupid, they just don't know that information to even consider it, and therefore their IQ scores might be depressed. So there's problems with that when we think about standardized testing in minorities. It's always presenting a problem. We know that these three things happen during the advancement of language study. We already, as young children, even infants, begin to understand a little bit about vocabulary, what words mean what. We also begin to understand the grammar and how we put nouns and pronouns and verbs together. And then the pragmatics of it, that we begin to use proper phrases to achieve a certain end. Rather than just say, money give, we might end up saying, give me the money. And, and a crime career could have started just because of that. Interestingly, with high quality elementary education, class size is probably overemphasized as a factor, let's say, in quality education. If you have a good teacher, you can have a good teacher work with 50 kids and be able to manage the classroom effectively. Teacher quality is the greatest impact on managing, let's say, a classroom environment. It's not size, it's not all the fancy toys and whistles and everything around the room, but it's that teacher's ability to harness the energy of the kids, keep them focused on the right task. Because in the same respect, sometimes we've seen teachers that aren't very good with 5 kids. They can't control the environment. So again, it has to do more with teacher quality. The other thing that has a huge significance on the value of an education is the relationship that families have to their children's education. The demands that a parent makes is very important in achieving academic success, or the lack thereof. So when a parent's involved in their child's education, communicating with the teachers, monitoring homework and doing things like that, we're creating, better students. We're also moving towards mainstreaming kids, keeping them in at least what they call the least restrictive environment. Normally kids that had, would have been considered low IQ, they would have been separated from the rest of the student body. Now we know that there's huge benefit in putting those children in typical classrooms where not only do they benefit from the modeling that they see in other children about what's appropriate behavior or how to learn to do certain things like Vygotsky talks about, but it also helps the older student or the more accomplished student, because they kind of have to step up. If they're going to be showing other kids what it is they need to do, they're going to do better. And they found that really inclusive classrooms do much better for keeping the kids all motivated to improving their growth educationally. All right, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to ask a bonus question so you have a chance to get some extra points here. The last question that I'm going to ask has to do with least restrictive. The law requires least restrictive. What do we call that in a classroom? And the word is inclusion. Least restrictive, required by law, means that those children of lower mental abilities are included in a typical classroom. So the term is inclusion. All right, well, that's this lecture. Make sure you have those questions answered, and